Hope you've energized yourself with a hot beverage because our next session is going to be equally exciting. Um, the DFI's role in the Indian alternative space. And the panel today will be answering the question, is their role positively different or more of the same? Speaking in today's panel and helping us moderate the panel today is Shushma Kaushik. Shushma is a partner at Avishkar and brings with her over 18 years of diverse experience in the field of early stage investing, small business incubation, and consulting across sectors. Welcome, Shushma.
Thanks so much,
The,
Rochelle.
the speakers from today's panel that you will have is Mr. S. Raman, who is the chairman and the managing director of SIDBI. He belongs to the 1991 batch of the Indian Audit and Accounts Services. He held various positions in the offices under the Comptroller and the Auditor General of India in various states, and also worked as the Executive Secretary to the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Welcome, sir. Next, we have Jab Ranking, who is the Director of Private Equity at FMO. He has been there since 2015. Prior to that position, he was the Director for Financial Institutions, and before that, the Director for Agribusiness and Diverse Sectors Department at FMO. Welcome, Jab. Next, we have Menno Dirks, who is the Managing Director for Private Equity at Sarona Asset Management and runs the flagship Sarona Private Equity Program, which invests in primary funds, secondaries, co-investments in emerging markets. With a dedicated team, they are constantly mapping investment opportunities in Asia, LATAM, Africa, emerging markets. Hello, Menno.
Hi, Rochelle.
Next, we have Neha Grover, who is the regional lead IFC South Asia Funds Group. Neha has been responsible for identifying and investing into funds, managing the current PE portfolio, and focusing on co-investments at IFC. She serves on the advisory board of 6 private equity funds. Welcome, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful session.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. So that gives me a good segue into what we will be discussing today on the role that DFIs are playing in the Indian ecosystem. So today, all of you must be very well aware of what we are witnessing in India. We're seeing unprecedented levels of startup innovation and disruptions across sector, as is evident from the number of unicorns being born every second day. Clearly, India's demographic dividend is kicking in, where we are seeing exceptional tech talent coming in to solve unique problems of the Indian ecosystem. Indian startups have raised a record $17 billion in the period between Jan to June of this year. A surge from the 12 billion that it raised last year, which was a COVID year, and the year before, which was $14 billion. So clearly, it's on the rise. And today we have the honor of speaking to 4 great panelists here, all of 4, very big institutions who have been supporting the startup ecosystem in India. So, Mr. Raman, I'll start with you. SIDBI has played such a very critical role in the startup ecosystem of India. SIDBI has assisted over 144 AIFs under various funds with a cumulative sanction of around $1 billion. Am I right there? And supported over 1,000 MSMEs and startups. So the question to you is, SIDBI is clearly a very prolific LP. What is the objective and vision of SIDBI, and where do you see the role of SIDBI playing? Where do you see all of this going?
Thank you. Thank you to the IBCA for inviting me here. My own little nugget is that I didn't know this before I joined SIDBI, which was about 6 months ago. And SIDBI was a pioneer in setting up the microfinance industry in this country. And that was really very inspiring to hear that story, because that was a time when I think we really didn't have a concept of microfinance, and there were a few NGOs. And therefore, in typical venture style, I think, little bits of seed capital were put into a few of the institutions, and then they were nurtured and sort of handheld And today we have a success story of Bandhan Bank and various other small finance banks. So I think it's been probably part of the DNA of SIDBI. It's been created as a DFI. The government has right from the beginning talked about SIDBI holding hands of the small entities and making them grow. So whether it's the financial sector or whether it's other sectors, SIDBI has been playing this role of coming in as an early venture partner. Of course, the terminology today is entirely different with the Series A and so on. But I think the understanding that SIDBI has that both equity and debt are probably looked at more or less the same way at some early stage of a company's life. Of course, the debt would come in when you cite some revenue, but the point is that there is a healthy mix of equity and debt, and I think that's really been one of the central sort of thoughts in SIDBI's work with the MSMEs. The opportunity of working with the government of India, that is the DPIIT, for marshalling the funds of in the fund of funds. That's been a great insight, which is been sort of has come into SIDBI. And today, I can sort of happily say that there are state governments which are taking inspiration from what has been done, and they are interested in setting up startup funds. So it's really, I think we've covered a tremendous journey in the last 20 years. Of course, what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years has been dramatic. But I think we're probably reaping the benefits of the work that has been done not only by SIDBI but several government agencies which have been involved in creation of or helping entities at a very early stage. So I would say that there's a lot more that SIDBI can do. The entire space is, I think, really about getting deeper into how a company runs and therefore getting onto the management. And that's where I think the time has probably come for SIDBI to hold hands with the AIFs, and that is really the way forward, because it's probably not within the mandate of SIDBI to sit on a company's board and help them run the show. So I think it's really about getting the angels, getting the ventures, and bringing them together, sharing the information. I think that is really the role that I would see SIDBI taking on in future.
No, absolutely, sir. We've witnessed firsthand the role of SIDBI in sectors like microfinance and now in the AIFs, and how prolific you are as an investor across the continuum of the funds, right? Whether it's very early stage, growth stage, and so on. So we do hope that SIDBI continues to be a large player in this ecosystem. And, I'll come back to you with more questions, but now we'll move to YAP. FMO is the Dutch Development Bank, and you guys invest across 85 odd countries, supporting mainly jobs and income generation as a key focus area. So how are you viewing the current liquidity scenario in India? Are you seeing this as an opportunity, or is it a threat to the work that you do?
It's a really good question, actually, Shashwa. Thanks, and also thanks for hosting me in this conference, Ivka. There are multiple insights, because as a development bank, as you know, we have to be additional to the market, and in these times, it's not easy because the additionality always has to be shown, also in our internal processes, but it's also obligation of the Dutch state, who is our major shareholder, to work additional and not crowd out private investors. And especially at these times when money is available pretty easily, which is also reflected in the valuations of multiple tech companies at the moment in India. It's hard to evidence and make clear that there's still an additional role. So I think there are ways to get around the additionality. We also can play a role which is additional to the market by providing our knowledge in our environmental environmental and social and governance perspectives, and by doing so, be transformational in the market. So that's an area where we are investing in a lot to also evidence that we can be additional even in the times that the market has abundance of liquidity. And in this abundance of liquidity at the moment, I think companies like ourselves with IFC and DG and all the other international finance institutions, they are longer term investors. And the market dynamics are not always longer term the same. So I remember well, to give an example, that in 2007-8, when we also had an abundance of liquidity and Menno was still at FMO, we had a strategy review and decided to move out of Brazil because we thought our role as development bank was outplayed in Brazil because of all liquidity around. So we stopped doing business in Brazil, and in 2009 the market was completely different. And our relationships in Brazil were asking, where's FMO? Because we need you. So I think it's also a signal that a development institution should stick to its relationships, build longer term partnerships, and by also providing additional services, we can be additional even in times that there is an abundance of liquidity. And not only in environmental and social, but also providing our knowledge and network across the world, because that can be interesting for a company in India to be linked to a company in Argentina, for instance, to learn from each other, which is something which can be additional to the market as well. But there's also for us a reason now to look into other markets. You have neighboring countries like Pakistan and Nepal and Bangladesh, who maybe do need our services more at this point of time than India. So we're also looking into the different markets. So where is our role more prominent, taking the current liquidity situation in India into account? So I would like to stick to that. I hope that answers your question, Shashan.
No, absolutely, Yap. And I like the point on additionality that you brought in. And I think at this moment, it's also important to bring up the climate crisis that we are facing globally, right? And even emerging countries, India is also facing something like this. So what is the role that FMO intends to play in to solve for? I'm not saying there is a solution for this, but the additionality part that you brought about, is there something one can do for that?
Yeah, as you know, FMO is focused on the climate action, SDG 13. So I think there are multiple angles in that. And there you also see a change in the market. In the first instance, we supported a lot of solar and wind projects in India. And I think especially that part of the market is currently also serviced well by commercial investors, although there's such a huge need of capital for bringing more of these projects to the market. So we still feel we are in India additional, but it also moved to CNI projects, which is not that much known to all the players in the market. So there, we started doing business 2-3 years ago. We are looking also now for all the activities which can contribute to the energy transition, because once you have more renewable energy in the market, which is available, you also need to bring it to the consumer, and there's a huge challenge because you can produce based on gas or coal-fired. It's really predictable, but sun is not always out there, wind is not always there, so the networks need to be improved in order to keep the networks stable and bring the energy where it's needed at each point of the day where it's necessary. There are investments needed in batteries, in storage of energy. There are investments needed in chargers for electrical vehicles. There are numerous sub areas in this transition where we feel there's a need, and where with our knowledge we can also still be additional. So thanks for this question, because it's indeed one of our core areas.
No, absolutely, App. And I think there's a big role for all of us to play, especially all of you,
Yeah.
because I know that this is a big focus area for most of you here.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So I'll move on to Neha. IFC, again, a member of the World Bank. It's the largest global development finance institution focused on private sector. And India is probably one of the largest asset allocation within the IFC portfolio, if I'm not wrong. So similar question that I asked, yeah, right? Like there is so much liquidity. What is the role that an IFC could play in the Indian ecosystem? Also, dovetailing it into what Yap mentioned on the additionality bit of it.
Sure. So, I think if I can step back for a second and talk about the role of IFC or what we've sort of tried to do, taking the example of India, right? So, if we step back and see, India was one of the, IFC was one of the first shareholders in HDFC. We were the first shareholders in ICICI. And therefore, I think if you look at the history 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and where we started in India as a World Bank group, I think we've tried to support the market. And that's, I think, one of the biggest roles that a DFI can play in any country, in any region. That is to first create the market and help strengthen it, right? And therefore, we've seen numerous examples of that. And for example, despite the sort of liquidity that let's take the example closer home of the private equity industry. We've been investing in this industry for over 20 years, and I think from the mid 2000s is when we've been almost consistently investing. Of course, different amounts, different sort of fund managers, and all of that, but we've been consistent in the market. Vis-a-vis, we had a lot of liquidity which came in between 2000 sort of 5 6 to 2008 till GFC, and after that liquidity disappeared. But it was DFIs like IFC, and I'm sure FMO and others as well, who were still investing and continue to invest through that period. And we've now consequently, I think in India we've got a portfolio of about 50 plus funds in actually this South Asia, but largely India, and about $1 billion that we've deployed. And this is across sectors. This is across generalist PE funds, VC funds, infrastructure, other sector funds. So not any one sort of situation. So the main role that we played in the private equity industry when we began was to help deepen the industry, because at that time there were barely any fund managers, there were barely any experienced fund managers to back as well, right? Now today, when you look at it, we see that the role that an IFC can play is changing. It's no longer to create the market, because the market, at least on the PE side, is quite deep, as we see. We've got 200, 300 plus managers. Most of them are doing relatively well. They're on their second fund, third fund, spinning out, and a lot of teams are spinning out and starting new funds. And I think that is where the role that we have with our managers is changing. We're saying, okay, we don't no longer need to sort of back first time fund managers. Let us see what additionality role we can play, maybe on the market side, maybe on the project side. So on the market side, one of the needs, for example, in India today is building the entire domestic LP capital base. We've got LPs like SIDBI, we've got NIF who's come in, who's been recently set up. But this is one of the most critical needs for the industry today, because as and when there's a global crisis which affects India or any other economy, foreign capital flies out. And therefore, if you don't have a domestic capital to plug this gap, you will always have the fundraising challenge that, for example, we've seen in India in the last 18 months, where a lot of good fund managers are facing or struggling to sort of raise money. And of course, I'm sure they'll all raise money, but it's just much longer, much harder, much tougher for everyone. The second aspect of additionality that I can see, and here again, we partnered with IVCA some time ago, and we said, okay, let's do an LP sort of education, LP awareness program. Let's discuss. IVCA is doing a lot of work on this on the regulatory side to see how money can be unlocked on the LP side, and we are trying to sort of play a role in that on that front. The second side, I think, could be project. right? Outcomes, for example, on gender. So, for example, last year we have a very huge gender team. We've partnered with sort of a few universities, done research, proven that having gender focused or gender diverse teams can actually increase your returns. It's not just playing lip service. Last year, we worked with all the fund managers that we backed, and we ensured that all of them have a gender focus depending on where they were. So it's not a one size fits all. If a fund manager is already doing a lot on gender, we say, okay, what more can you do? If someone is not doing anything, then we say, okay, can we start tracking data at the portfolio level so you know where to begin and what more change you can get in, right? So we're doing the same thing we're doing for climate, the same thing we're doing for ESG, for corporate governance, all of those sort of individual issues. So this is what we call non-financial additionality. So capital is not the only thing that everyone needs, right? Like a private equity player, when you are looking at your portfolio company, you are trying to give them capital, but also capital plus plus. And that is where we are seeing, okay, as an LP, what more can we help you with? Can we help you in your fundraising? Of course, we can't go and raise your fund for us, but can we help you in some way? And therefore, we are still one of the early backers for a lot of fund managers in the fundraising process, because that will give a strong signal to the market and sort of help fundraising. The non-financial additionality that I talked about again is very critical for us, and we that is the second piece of it. And third, I think, is though there is a lot of liquidity, and this ties into what Yap was talking about, that though there's a lot of capital which is flowing in, the capital is flowing into very certain, very narrow sort of strategies and segments of the market. There is still a huge, wide gap that we have to fulfill, right? Which is, be it SMEs, be it sort of, okay, forget the tech sector, the tech enabled businesses which are getting all the money. Leave aside those 200, 300, 400 companies. The rest of the country, you talk to them, they don't have credit, they don't have equity, and as part of that, for example, last year we decided that okay, we will back performing credit strategies in India as well. And we've been working with our FIC team, and we're about to commit to a performing credit private credit fund in India, where that is where they are focusing on mid market companies which are not getting credit, where we're talking about so much of liquidity, but is the money flowing to them? No, not at all. So that is, the kind of non-financial additionality and even financial additionality that we're trying to see. Okay, what is the priority for, let's say, the government in India? What is our priority as a DFI in India? And how can we bridge that gap and ensure that our money is going into channels and segments where it is actually needed? So I'll stop here, but happy
No,
to certainly.
thanks, Neha, because I think this was a very important insight that you brought out, that while there is liquidity in India, all that liquidity is just chasing a few set of companies, right? There's still a lot of businesses out there who are cash starved, who are credit starved, and that's where DFIs definitely have a very large role to play, as you have demonstrated in the past. We have seen you guys support sectors like the microfinance at the peak of their crisis, and that is a very, very important role that we continue to see you guys do. And I'll come back to you on the SME support, but also just quick point on the additionality. You did mention about gender. You did mention about a couple of other initiatives that your team is driving, and those are very, very critical in the larger scheme of things of India. So I will come back. Thanks so much for bringing those up. So Meadow, coming to you, you've been investing actively in various emerging markets, and of course, India is a focus area for you as well. How can you draw parallels? What is it that you see that's happening in India? What is unique? What is not? And do you see this as just some kind of irrational exuberance that will pass, or is this here to stay?
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was really interesting also to listen to my other to our colleagues in the market. I would say Jaap and Nia and Mr. Raman. Look, India we invest globally in emerging markets, and India is and has always been a very important destination for our capital. I've been personally, my investment experience, and now I'm investing across the world, but my longest experience is investing in India. And I still find India also the most challenging place to invest, despite that I have my longest experience there. So yeah, I think in my experience, cycles are especially deep, and mountains are especially high in India, and they change quickly around. And look, we just have, we're still middle in the COVID crisis, although it is receding a bit. But before that, shortly before that, we had MBFC crisis, we had the Demon, we had GST. So continuous, challenges in the market. But what I'm really positive to see is that so many, we invest in private equity funds, that the market now, I think, is more clear and more professional than ever, because over the past crises, let's say the past 10 years, I think a lot of GPs that were not able to perform in difficult circumstances, have simply left the field, and the ones still standing are stronger, and the ones coming up now, I think, are not naive about the challenges to raise in India and to invest in India. So I think the quality to select from is really high, and I think, to be honest, I think a lot of international investors may not fully appreciate that, because they look back at what they have experienced in the last couple of years. But I'm quite positive there. In terms of India has always, if you look at company investing, India has always been expensive, and almost in every cycle, and probably will always continue.
I was just waiting for you to say this.
But it continues to be so, and so I think that will not rapidly change there. And but I also would like to touch upon the role of the DFIs that I see also in this landscape in India. So I think it's great how FMO, IFC, and also other DFIs play a role in emerging managers, and by the way, SIDBI, of course, as well. Emerging managers, emerging sectors play a key role. But I also really believe that there is a role to play with the larger fund managers. I don't think that DFIs need to be too modest about that. For example, having ESG and impact focus is also important for fund managers that are raising $1 billion plus funds. And the larger pension funds in the world find it important. And I think a lot of that capital can be catalyzed if they see that a solid ESG and impact foundation has been laid at those GPs. So I know there's always this question at the DFIs that after backing fund 1, 2, and 3, should they still be backing fund number 4, which is raising $1 billion? And I think many of them tend to say no. But I think you could, but change the role indeed. Really focus on how can we keep the standards of ESG and impact high, and there is an impact in attracting foreign capital to emerging markets. And I think that is still a challenge for Indian private equity market to get a lot of international capital in, and there could still be a role for the DFIs, I believe.
No, absolutely, Menon. I don't think anyone is disputing it. It was just a point to drive home that DFIs are equally important, and there are much larger roles that DFIs need to play in the fund managers journey. So yes, backing the first fund, second fund does not mean the role ends there. There are much larger roles for us fund managers to continue to be responsible investors. So I'll just pause here. I will go back to Mr. Raman. And you've been meeting a lot of fund managers. You've been seeing the startup ecosystem. Neha brought about a very important point that while there is liquidity, it is all flowing to certain sectors. In fact, just before this panel, I was in a conversation where someone asked me that if I am not a tech startup, does that mean I should not start anything? So, these are the kind of questions that one is hearing in actual India. So if you could just share some of your views and, ally some of the concerns that people have out there.
No, I think the panelists have made some exceedingly insightful points. I think I really like the one on the fact that why is it that money is only chasing the tech funds or the tech infused startups? So I think the answer is very simple, that there's a greater probability of success. So it's still very early days. I would say that India is probably still the tip of the tech iceberg, if I were to call it that. There's so much more that's happening, and probably tech might just drive so many other sectors. So I think tech is just a tool. At the end of the day, that's really how we have to look at it. What we are seeing right now looks extraordinarily skewed towards companies which are tech based and providing a pure digital service. But once that the tools are employed in different sectors, then probably everything will become tech or everything will become normal. So it's just a way of looking at it. What I really feel is the way India is looking at it, and I think we've had some great conversations at the highest of levels. The National Startup Council had deliberated some time ago. There is a lot of money which is available. And I think one of the big events or big ticket items that we are pushing forward along with the government is the whole concept of bringing in more information on a single portal. So it's really about putting out information. It's not government's job to make sure that the investor invests in the investee company, but it's very important that the investors can see the profile of 52,000 companies registered today, which will become probably 152,000 very soon. So I think it's really critical for us to be able to put out information. I think the point made on additionality is really at the core of what a DFI does. So when nobody else is interested in doing it, the DFI, being an arm of the government, has to step in and do that. So that's something that SIDBI is working on, creating that sort of large portal. Call it by whatever name you want, but at the end of the day, it's information flows that are available for investors. And investors will also look very different. I mean, today, I'm not saying whether it's foreign capital versus domestic capital, but there are so many HNI investors in this country. I mean, I spent a good number of years in SEBI, and I can tell you that I have seen enormous flows of money in small towns of this country, and that money is all chasing return. So the business sense is overflowing within the country. It's really about making it easy for that money to come into an organized fund. So really the point is that if it's only HNI money, it's only my personal risk. Why should there be excessive regulation? And that's really a larger point which the regulators of the country need to again revisit. I think it's very important to just allow the money to come into the formal sector and start chasing the returns, and then you'll actually find that people are looking at risks which are more within their appetite. Not everybody wants to go into a tech company. So you'll see a lot more behavior that's coming out into the open. So it's about making that platform work. It's about giving that information to a wider group. And the other point I'd like to actually bring out is, and SIDBI is already doing this, is going really into what is incubation centers. I think there's enormous value there. We are probably not even aware of the fact that India can be very, very inexpensive. I do not know where Menu is putting his money, but I'm just saying that there are enormously good deals to be obtained. But we need to guide all sorts of funds towards what is available. I mean, we are running 3 incubation centers across the country. And I've actually interacted with some of those startups. It's brilliant, the kind of work they're doing. Now, each one of them is looking for something in really small, like 20 to 30 lakhs. That's the kind of money they're looking for, which is, nothing compared to the kind of stuff that, people in this panel are used to dealing with. So, there is enormous value. It's really about a guide towards where does this value lie. And I really feel that incubation centers is another great way of moving ahead. In fact, the entire scientific community of India is by itself nothing but a series of incubation centers, and we've got a great set of scientific research laboratories in India, which may be largely in the quasi stroke government sector, but there's great value happening there. So I really feel that it's about creating that larger view that funds pursuing returns is good, it's healthy, it's not to be looked down upon as it might have been 25 years ago. So there's a lot of mindset change which is also happening as we all speak. And I think a lot of us in this space of the DFIs, we would probably add a lot more value if we were to go into really these small areas and guide others to where value probably exists.
No, absolutely, sir. I think the point that you made was very crucial, that there is liquidity, and investors are looking for different asset classes to invest in depending on their risk appetite. And tech investment is probably one end of that spectrum, but you need to open up the awareness levels that there are other asset classes also that can add a lot more value to the overall India story. So absolutely, very strong point made, sir. So yeah, coming back to you, right? I mean, there was a point that you ended with in terms of what is the big role that say FMO is going to be playing in terms of the additionality bit that you spoke of on the climate, but also with respect to the jobs and livelihoods part that FMO historically has been doing. So how do you tie the two up?
Oh, that's a good question, and yeah, I think they can go hand in hand, right? I think climate risk is, I think once we are done with the pandemic, it's there and it will continue to be there. So I don't think you can talk about a livelihood without thinking about the climate change and the risks inherent to it, because you see these large natural disasters everywhere in the world. I think in India you also noticed this year a big disaster in the far northeast of the country, where you had the collapse of a huge glacier, which created a lot of damage in the country. And I think these things happen, and that also affects immediately the livelihood of the poor. So a lot of rain, more rain than you could expect in a normal year, is a climate risk which is coming up every day. It affects our lives across the world. So it's something which should be at the base of all our investment decisions, to see what effect do we have with this investment on the future of this planet. And I think this is crucial in the way we assess all our risk. The European Union is bringing out a taxonomy to the banks, where you need to think about climate risks in all your investments. You have to have plans. What happens if this happens to your balance sheet, in the sense how does it affect the risks in your portfolio. So there's so much linked to climate. So that's why I think for FMO it's a crucial importance to contribute to a world where we still can live well together in 2050.
Great.
And beyond.
No, thanks, Ayap, and I do hope that FMO continues in what they are doing here, especially in India. So very quickly, I think we are running out of time. So Neha, just a wrap-up question: if you were to give an advice to a fund manager, on how they are approaching fundraising, what would you tell them?
So specifically on fundraising, I think right now India is going to have a super exciting journey for the next 10 years. So are all the fund managers. I think if you are a fundraiser, if you are fundraising in this environment, you need to start getting back out there. I think I can see a lot of people have started traveling. LPs are now taking meetings, and therefore I would recommend start your marketing, even if don't The conversion rate at this point in time is also long for you to convert an LP from interest level to actual sort of commitment, and therefore keep at it. Be patient. The tide will turn. India is one of the shining stars in the global economy, and a lot of people are interested. It's just a matter of time. Thanks to COVID, I think things have gotten delayed, and it's been a little bit tough. But keep at it.
Great. Thanks, Neha. So, Menno, you heard Neha. India is the shining star. So, when is the money coming in?
Yeah, look, we are always. I think India is one of the few countries, well, the only country where we're running into our country limit as well. So we are actively investing. Look, but in terms of advice on managers, I think it's really now you need to be credible. And 10 years ago, you could get away with a nice presentation with a beautiful macro and that you will invest everywhere. Now you need to be, I think, credible in what you want to achieve, and a bit of specialization is important, either on financial inclusion, on technology, on healthcare. So you need to be specialized and have your team together. So be really sincere credible about what you want to achieve, and as a GP, and then you can raise the money. I really see a distinction there also in funds in India. Some of them are struggling, but some of them who are doing well are also raising easily and getting in oversubscribed situations. So as long as you're credible and you can get it, you can fundraise.
Great. Now, thanks. Thank you all. I think we've come to an end of this session. I was just looking to see if there are any questions that we've left unanswered. So broadly, I think we've covered most of the questions. The big takeaway is that there is a big role for DFIs to play, and fund managers in India are eager to work with all of you. Rochelle, over to you.
I think the jury is out on the role of the DFIs. It's net positive. So thank you so much, panelists, for that very insightful session. Something for us to take home about is it's definitely capital plus plus, right? The aspect of additionality. I'm a part of a private equity fund that has a whole host of DFIs as well, and we've understood the value of DFI in our fraternity. And that's not just capital, but it's also the knowledge, the networks, the ESG standards, and also, as Neha put it and the other panelists put it, the cash-starved segments that don't have capital, where the role of DFI is going to be very active. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your insights. And hopefully we get the DFI support for all the private equity funds that are raising capital. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.